In January of 2013, a 21-year-old woman named Elisa Lam checked into a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. 3 weeks later, she would be found dead in a place no guest should ever end up, and the footage of her final known hours would become one of the most watched and most debated videos on the entire internet. Elisa was a university student from Vancouver, British Columbia. She was smart, artistic, and known among friends for keeping a detailed blog where she wrote about her struggles and her travels in equal measure. In early 2013, she set out on a solo trip down the west coast of the United States, updating that blog along the way with photos, observations, and small dispatches from each new city. Her plan was to make her way towards Santa Cruz, California, and along the route, she stopped in Los Angeles. The hotel she chose was the Cecil. By 2013, the building had been rebranded as a budget hostel called Stay on Main, marketed toward backpackers and students looking for a cheap bed in the heart of downtown. But underneath the new name was a building with one of the darkest reputations in America. Built in the 1920s as a glamorous destination for travelers, the Cecil had slowly become something else entirely over the decades that followed. It had been linked to numerous suicides, several unexplained deaths, and at least 2 notorious killers who had stayed there, including serial killer Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, and Jack Unterweger, an Austrian murderer who posed as a journalist. Locals already treated the building with a kind of quiet dread long before Elisa Lam ever walked through its doors. She checked in on January 26th. Hotel staff would later recall that early in her stay, she was moved out of a shared dormitory room and placed into a private one, reportedly because of behavior other guests found odd. What exactly happened in those first few days is still not fully clear, but it set the stage for what was to come. On the night of January 31st, Elisa stepped into one of the hotel's elevators. What the security camera recorded over the next several minutes would eventually be watched by millions of people around the world. Dressed in a red hoodie, she presses button after button on the panel, but the doors do not close. She steps out into the hallway, looks both directions as though checking for someone, and steps back inside. She retreats into the corner of the elevator, pressing herself against the wall, almost as if trying to become as small and hidden as possible. Her hands move through the air in strange, jerky gestures, and at moments it looks as though she may be talking to someone, though no one else is ever visible on camera and no one else appears to enter the frame. She steps in and out several more times. And then, after nearly 2 full minutes of this strange, unsettling sequence, she walks away down the hallway, and the elevator doors finally slide shut behind her. That was the last time Elisa Lam was ever seen alive. Her parents, who had been in daily contact with her throughout the trip, quickly noticed the silence and reported her missing. Police searched the Cecil Hotel from top to bottom. They went through guest rooms, stairwells, storage areas, and common spaces. Her belongings were still in her room exactly as she had left them, including her wallet, her identification, and her laptop. There was no sign of forced entry, no drug paraphernalia, nothing that immediately pointed to foul play. The room was described as messy, but not as a crime scene. Elisa herself, however, was nowhere to be found. Weeks passed with no answers. Investigators released the elevator footage to the public in mid-February, hoping someone watching might recognize her or come forward with information. Instead, the video ignited a wave of amateur detective work online. Viewers combed over every frame, freezing on her hand movements, debating what she might have been reacting to. One theory that spread quickly involved something called the Korean elevator game, a piece of internet folklore claiming that pressing elevator buttons in a specific sequence could open a doorway to another dimension. Other theories pointed toward the paranormal reputation of the hotel itself. And in one deeply unfortunate turn, online sleuths fixated on a heavy metal musician who had been staying at the Cecil around the same time and had posted a music video featuring a woman being chased through a forest. Amateur investigators accused him of being involved in her death, flooding him with harassment for months, even though he was later confirmed to have been out of the country when she died. He was completely innocent, and by his own account, the accusations took a serious toll on him. Meanwhile, the actual investigation had stalled for a very different reason. Just one day after the elevator footage was released, a former Los Angeles police officer named Christopher Dorner began a 9-day killing spree that consumed the attention of nearly the entire department. It wasn't until Dorner's standoff with police ended in mid-February that investigators could fully turn their focus back to finding Elisa. Then, on February 19th, 19 days after she vanished, hotel guests began complaining. Some said the water pressure running through the taps had grown weak. Others said the water itself looked darker than it should. A few guests even described a strange taste and smell coming from the faucets. Eventually, a maintenance worker climbed up to inspect the massive water tanks on the hotel's roof. He opened the hatch of one tank, looked inside, and found Elisa Lam's body floating in the water. She was unclothed, with her clothing found drifting nearby inside the tank. The discovery shocked the public almost as much as the elevator footage had. How does a young woman end up inside a sealed rooftop water tank in a hotel full of guests without anyone noticing for nearly 3 weeks? Investigators worked to piece together how she could have gotten there. The rooftop itself was accessible through a fire escape, and while some entrances to the roof were supposed to be locked or alarmed, it was determined she could have reached the tanks on her own, without help from anyone else. The medical examiner found no signs of significant physical trauma and no evidence that she had been assaulted. There was nothing to suggest another person had been involved in her death. The official cause of death was ruled accidental drowning. Bipolar disorder was listed as a significant contributing factor, and investigators learned that Elisa had not been consistently taking her prescribed medication in the period before her death. Experts who reviewed the case, including those who later spoke about it publicly, have suggested that the elevator footage may show her in the middle of a psychotic episode, a state in which people with bipolar disorder can lose their grip on what is real and what isn't, sometimes believing they are being watched, followed, or threatened by someone who isn't actually there. Even with an official ruling, the case has never fully settled in the public imagination. People still ask why she was behaving the way she was in that elevator. They still ask how she managed to climb into a rooftop tank without being seen. They still ask why it took so long for anyone to find her. Those unanswered questions have kept the theories alive for well over a decade, from claims of a hidden killer, to ghost stories tied to the hotel's past, to elaborate conspiracies that investigators have repeatedly said are not supported by any actual evidence. In the years since, Elisa Lam's story has been retold again and again through documentaries, books, podcasts, and countless videos online, including a widely watched Netflix docuseries released in 2021 that revisited the entire case in detail. Her story reignited interest in the Cecil Hotel's long and troubled history, and for many, it also opened a wider conversation about mental illness and how easily the signs of a crisis can be misread by strangers watching from a distance. More than a decade later, that grainy elevator video is still one of the most unsettling pieces of surveillance footage ever released to the public. Not because it proves anything supernatural was happening inside that elevator, but because, frame by frame, it shows the final known moments of a young woman in visible distress, just days before her life came to a tragic and painfully avoidable end.